At first they thought it was a glitch, lost signals, misaligned satellites, but then entire star systems went dark. No comms, no ships, no screams, just nothing. In the outer rim, Dr. Zara Kelmont was alone, her station the last whisper in a region gone mute, and she saw it. Not war, not invasion, something worse. The silence. It didn't burn cities or shatter planets, it emptied them. No bodies, no wreckage, just abandoned worlds where thought had died. The Centauri Alliance, elegant, noble, and utterly unprepared, could only watch as entire civilizations vanished. Conventional weapons failed, diplomacy meant nothing. So, they turned to the ones they had cast out. To the species they once feared, the ones they branded as too violent, too unpredictable, to the Deathworlders, and humanity answered, but not with comfort, not with peace. They returned with weapons shaped by nightmares and minds sharpened by exile. They came not to save, but to hunt the silence. This is the story of a galaxy on the edge of extinction, and the ruthless response of the monsters it once banished. The silent scream. Dr. Zara Kelmont pressed her palm against the cold viewport of Research Station Omega-7, watching the stars that had been her companions for the past 3 years. The isolation had never bothered her before. As a xenobiologist studying the unique quantum flora of the outer rim, she had grown accustomed to silence broken only by the gentle hum of life support systems and the occasional chatter from supply ships. But today, the silence felt different. Wrong. She turned back to her communication console, the blue glow illuminating her concerned features. For 6 days she had been trying to reach the neighboring systems. Kepler Station, with its population of 12,000 researchers and miners, had gone quiet 4 days ago. The agricultural colonies on Harvest Prime had stopped their daily transmissions 2 days later. Even the automated beacon from the refueling depot at Junction Point had fallen silent yesterday. Zara pulled up the sector map on her main screen. Red indicators marked every system within 50 light-years. Communication lost. No response to emergency frequencies. Nothing. She activated her long-range scanner, sweeping across the nearby star systems. What she saw made her blood turn cold. The electromagnetic signatures that should have indicated thriving civilizations were simply absent. Not destroyed, not damaged, just gone. As if billions of people had simply stopped existing. Her hands trembled as she initiated another scan, focusing on Kepler Station. The massive mining platform should have been generating enormous energy readings from its fusion reactors and industrial operations. Instead, the scanners showed a perfectly normal space station floating in orbit around a perfectly normal planet, but with no signs of life whatsoever. The communication system crackled to life, making her jump. For a moment, hope flared in her chest, but the voice that came through was her own automated distress beacon, cycling through emergency frequencies in a dozen different languages. Zara rubbed her eyes and tried to think logically. Mass evacuations were possible, though unlikely without any warning. Equipment failures could explain some communication blackouts, but not across multiple systems simultaneously. Solar flares might disrupt communications, but her instruments showed no unusual stellar activity. She was running through possibilities when her deep space sensors detected something that made her forget about logical explanations entirely. The readings didn't make sense at first. Her instruments were picking up a massive object moving between star systems at a speed that should have been impossible for anything larger than a small scout ship. But the mass reading suggested something the size of a small moon, traveling at nearly 1/10 the speed of light without any detectable propulsion system. Zara enhanced the scan and felt her scientific training war with primal fear. The object, whatever it was, wasn't reflecting light normally. It seemed to bend space around itself, creating a distortion that made her instruments struggle to maintain a lock. More disturbing was its trajectory. It was moving systematically from system to system, following the same path as the communication blackouts. She began recording everything, her training as a researcher overriding her growing panic. If she was going to die out here, at least she could leave a record for whoever found her station. As she worked, a new reading appeared on her sensors. The object had changed course and was now heading directly toward her position. At its current speed, it would arrive in approximately 18 hours. Zara activated her emergency transmitter, broadcasting on all frequencies toward the core systems of the Centauri Alliance. Her message was simple and desperate. This is Dr. Zara Kelmont at Research Station Omega. 7. Unknown entity approaching. All surrounding systems have gone silent. No signs of destruction. Just emptiness. Something is consuming consciousness itself. If anyone receives this, warn the Alliance. Warn everyone. She spent the next few hours preparing. Her station's small defensive systems were designed to repel pirates or deflect asteroids, not to face whatever was coming. But she was human, and humans had a reputation for stubborn refusal to go quietly into the dark. As the hours passed, her instruments tracked the approaching entity with increasing precision. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. The reading suggested something organic, or perhaps something that existed partially outside normal space. Her quantum sensors, designed to study exotic matter, were registering impossible readings. With 6 hours until contact, Zara made a discovery that chilled her to the bone. She had been reviewing the historical data from the silent systems when she noticed a pattern. The entity didn't destroy anything. Planets remained intact, space stations continued operating, even automated systems kept functioning. But every form of consciousness, from the simplest bacterial collective intelligence to the most advanced artificial minds, had simply ceased. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This thing wasn't a weapon or an invading force. It was something else entirely, something that fed on the very essence of thought and awareness. 4 hours until contact, and Zara received an unexpected response to her distress call. The sleek ships of the Centauri Alliance emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the blue-white energy fields that marked them as the most advanced vessels in known space. Commander Thrix Valderon's face appeared on her communication screen. The tall, elegant Centauri officer looked exactly like what he was, the product of a civilization that had mastered war through superior technology and tactical precision. Dr. Kelmont. His melodious voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. We received your transmission. My fleet stands ready to investigate this anomaly. Please prepare for immediate evacuation. Zara shook her head. Commander, you don't understand. This isn't something you can fight with conventional weapons. My readings suggest it exists partially outside our normal dimensional framework. Your energy weapons might pass right through it. Valderon's expression remained confident. Doctor, the Centauri Alliance has faced many threats. Our quantum disruptors can affect matter at the subatomic level. Whatever this entity is, we will stop it. As if summoned by his words, the entity finally came into visual range. Zara's viewports dimmed automatically as they tried to process what they were seeing. The thing defied easy description. It appeared as a shifting mass of absolute darkness shot through with veins of something that hurt to look at directly. Reality seemed to bend around it, creating a visual effect like looking at the world through broken glass. Commander, Zara whispered into her communicator, are you seeing this? The Alliance fleet had already moved into attack formation. 12 heavy cruisers and twice as many smaller vessels arranged themselves in a perfect combat spread. Their weapons powered up, filling space with the distinctive whine of charging quantum disruptors. All ships, open fire, Valderon commanded. The barrage was impressive. Beams of pure energy lanced out from the Alliance vessels, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust. The quantum disruptors created cascading explosions of light as they destabilized matter at the molecular level. For a moment, Zara allowed herself to hope. Then the smoke cleared, and the entity remained unchanged. Worse, as Zara watched in horror, the Alliance ships began to go dark one by one. Not destroyed, not damaged, just empty. Their automated systems continued functioning, their hulls remained intact, but the life signs of their crews simply vanished from her sensors. Commander Valderon, she called out, but received no response. On her screen, she could see his flagship drifting silently, its bridge lights still functioning but no one at the controls. The entity had consumed the consciousness of an entire fleet without appearing to exert any effort at all. It now turned its attention toward her station, and Zara could feel something pressing against her mind. Not painful exactly, but alien and hungry. She fought against the intrusion, her human stubbornness proving surprisingly effective. Whatever this thing was, it seemed to have difficulty processing her chaotic, unpredictable thought patterns. Where the disciplined minds of the Centauri officers had been consumed instantly, her human brain's tendency toward random tangents and emotional responses created interference. Using this temporary reprieve, Zara activated every recording device on her station and began transmitting on all frequencies. Someone needed to know what had happened here, what was coming for the rest of the galaxy. This is Dr. Zara Kelmont. She spoke rapidly, feeling the pressure in her mind increasing. The entity feeds on consciousness itself. Organized thoughts, disciplined minds, artificial intelligences, it consumes them all. The Centauri Alliance fleet was destroyed without a shot fired. Their weapons were useless. The pressure became unbearable, and Zara felt her thoughts beginning to scatter. But even as darkness closed in, she managed one final transmission. If anyone receives this, you need to find the humans. They were exiled 50 years ago for being too aggressive, too chaotic. But chaos might be the only thing that can fight this. Find them before it's too late. Her last conscious thought was a bitter irony. The galaxy had cast out humanity for being too dangerous, too unpredictable. Now that same unpredictability might be their only hope for survival. Research Station Omega-7 continued its orbit, its automated systems functioning perfectly. Its communication array broadcast a repeating message into the void, and its sensors dutifully recorded the approach of something that existed beyond the normal laws of physics. But of Dr. Zara Kelmont, pioneer of xenobiology and the last witness to the entity's power, there remained no trace. Like billions before her, she had been consumed by something that fed on the very essence of thought itself. The Silent had claimed another system, and it was still hungry. The Forgotten Warrior's ambassador, Keth Morvain, stood at the viewport of his diplomatic vessel, staring at the blue-green world that hung before him like a jewel against the black of space. New Terra looked peaceful from orbit, its cities glowing softly in the darkness of the planet's night side. But Morvain knew the truth behind that serene appearance. This world, and the dozen others like it in this remote system, housed the most dangerous beings the galaxy had ever known: humans. For 50 years they had been exiled to these distant worlds, banished after the Helix Wars when their methods of warfare had horrified even their allies. The Centauri Alliance had won that conflict, but the victory had come at a cost that still haunted the nightmares of military commanders across the galaxy. The humans had fought not just to win, but to completely destroy their enemies' capacity and will to fight. Now, with the silence consuming system after system, the Alliance found itself in the uncomfortable position of needing those same terrifying warriors. Morvain's aide, a young Centauri named Lith Karen, approached with obvious nervousness. "Ambassador, we're receiving a response to our communication request. The humans, they want to meet planetside." The ambassador nodded grimly. Of course they did. Making the Alliance delegation come to them was both a practical security measure and a pointed reminder of who held the power in this negotiation. After 50 years of exile, the humans weren't going to make things easy. The shuttle descended through New Terra's atmosphere, passing over cities that looked both familiar and alien. The architecture was clearly human, but it had evolved during their isolation into something harder, more practical than the graceful curves favored by Alliance worlds. Everything looked built for war. They landed at what appeared to be a civilian spaceport, but Morvain's trained eye spotted the defensive positions hidden among the terminal buildings, the discreet weapon emplacements that could turn the landing field into a kill zone within seconds. The humans hadn't just survived their exile, they had thrived and armed themselves for whatever might come. Captain Elena Rodriguez was waiting for them at the shuttle ramp. She was tall for a human, her dark hair streaked with gray, and she moved with the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted her ability to handle whatever the universe threw at her. Her uniform was black and practical, marked with insignia that Morvain didn't recognize. "Ambassador Morvain," she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome to New Terra. I'm Captain Rodriguez, New Terra Defense Corps." Morvain accepted the handshake, noting the strength in her grip and the calluses that spoke of someone who still did physical work despite her rank. "Captain Rodriguez, thank you for agreeing to meet with us." "Let's walk," Rodriguez said, leading them away from the shuttle. "I assume this is about the silence." The directness surprised Morvain. He had prepared for lengthy diplomatic preliminaries, but the human was cutting straight to the core of the matter. "You know about it?" Rodriguez smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Ambassador, just because you exiled us doesn't mean we stopped paying attention to what happens in the galaxy. We've been tracking the disappearances for weeks. Whole systems going dark, Alliance fleets vanishing without a trace. Whatever this thing is, your conventional forces can't stop it." They entered a building that looked like a civilian conference center but felt like a fortress. The walls were too thick, the windows too narrow, and Morvain noticed that every person they passed was armed. The humans weren't taking any chances. The conference room contained a holographic display showing a three-dimensional map of the local galactic region. Red zones marked the areas where the silence had struck, and the pattern made Morvain's stomach clench with fear. The entity was moving systematically toward the core worlds, consuming everything in its path. "We lost contact with Dr. Kelmont's research station yesterday," Morvain said without preamble. "Along with Commander Valderon's entire fleet, 12 heavy cruisers and their escorts gone without firing a shot." Rodriguez studied the display, her expression thoughtful. Valderon was a good officer. If he couldn't touch this thing with quantum disruptors, then we're dealing with something that operates outside normal physics. Our scientists believe it feeds on consciousness itself, Morvain continued. Every form of intelligent thought in the affected systems has been consumed, but physical structures remain intact. Interesting. Rodriguez highlighted several systems on the map. Notice the pattern? It's avoiding the chaotic zones, the regions where pirates and rebels operate. It seems to prefer organized civilizations. The door opened and another human entered. He was older than Rodriguez, his face marked with scars that spoke of a violent past. His uniform bore the insignia of a general, and Morvain felt a chill as he recognized the name on his identification, Marcus Chen. General Chen was a legend whispered about in Alliance military academies. During the Helix Wars, he had been the architect of humanity's most controversial victory, the Siege of Korath Prime, where human forces had used psychological warfare so extreme that the defending army had surrendered rather than face complete mental breakdown. Ambassador, Chen said, taking a seat at the conference table. I've been reviewing the data from the lost systems. This entity isn't just feeding on consciousness, it's learning from what it consumes. What do you mean? Morvain asked. Chen activated another hologram, this one showing the silence's attack patterns. Look at how it moves. The first systems fell quickly because they were unprepared, but by the time it reached Valderon's fleet, it had absorbed the tactical knowledge of dozens of military commanders. It knew exactly what they would do before they did it. Rodriguez nodded grimly. That's why your organized, predictable tactics failed. The entity has consumed enough military minds to anticipate every standard strategy in the Alliance playbook. But not human strategies, Morvain said, beginning to understand. Exactly. Chen leaned forward. For 50 years, you've kept us isolated because our methods were too chaotic, too unpredictable. We don't fight by the rules because rules get you killed. We adapt, improvise, and do whatever it takes to win. Even if it means sacrificing entire worlds? Morvain asked, remembering the stories from the Helix Wars. Rodriguez and Chen exchanged glances. Ambassador, Rodriguez said carefully, how many worlds has the silence already consumed? 17 systems. Perhaps 40 billion lives. Then we're past the point of worrying about collateral damage, Chen said bluntly. The question is whether you want the galaxy to survive, not whether you approve of our methods. Morvain felt the weight of his civilization's survival pressing down on him. The Alliance had always prided itself on fighting cleanly, following rules of engagement that minimized civilian casualties and preserved infrastructure. But those same rules had made them predictable, and predictability was death when facing an enemy that learned from every encounter. What would you need? He asked finally. Rodriguez smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. Full tactical authority, no Alliance oversight, no rules of engagement, no questions about our methods until after we win. And access to our research, Chen added. Everything you know about this entity, all the data from the lost systems, complete intelligence cooperation. Morvain hesitated. What they were asking for amounted to giving humanity a blank check to wage war however they saw fit. The Alliance had spent 50 years trying to forget what humans were capable of when given free rein. There's something else, Rodriguez said, standing and walking to the viewport. We've been developing new technologies during our exile, things the Alliance wouldn't approve of under normal circumstances. She gestured, and the hologram changed to show schematics that made Morvain's eyes widen. Weapons that seemed to bend reality itself, defensive systems based on principles he didn't recognize, and something labeled Cognitive Warfare Suite that looked like it could weaponize thought itself. You've been preparing for this, he realized. Chen nodded. Not specifically for the silence, but for threats that conventional forces couldn't handle. When you live on the frontier surrounded by unknown dangers, you learn to think outside the box. We can stop this thing, Rodriguez said with quiet confidence. But we need your authorization to do it our way. No second guessing, no moral qualms about our tactics, and no complaints afterward about what we had to do. Morvain looked at the map again, at the spreading red zones that marked dead systems. 40 billion lives already lost, and the silence was accelerating. At this rate, it would reach the core worlds within months. I don't have the authority to make that decision alone, he said. Then get someone who does, Chen replied. Because every day you spend debating is another system that dies. Rodriguez activated a communication panel. We're transmitting our fleet disposition to your ship. Take a look at what we've built during our exile, then ask yourself if you can afford to say no. The data that flowed across Morvain's personal display made him forget how to breathe. The human exile fleet wasn't the ragtag collection of outdated ships he had expected. These were vessels unlike anything in the Alliance database, built with technologies that seemed to blur the line between science and impossibility. Dreadnoughts that could fold space around themselves, fighters that existed partially outside normal time, weapons that could strike across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The humans hadn't just survived their exile, they had used it to become something beyond the Alliance's understanding. "My God," he whispered. "We prefer to think of ourselves as evolution in action," Rodriguez said. "The Alliance wanted us to disappear, so we did. But we didn't stop growing, didn't stop adapting, didn't stop preparing for the day when the galaxy would need us again." "How soon can you move?" Morvain asked. Chen checked his chronometer. "Our advanced scouts are already in position at the edge of silence-controlled space. The main fleet can be ready to move in 72 hours. But Ambassador, once we start this fight, there's no going back. We won't stop until either we win or there's nothing left to save." Morvain stood, feeling the weight of galactic civilization on his shoulders. Outside the viewport, New Terra's cities gleamed in the darkness, harboring the descendants of warriors who had been exiled for being too dangerous to trust. Now they were the galaxy's only hope. "I'll get you your authorization," he said finally, "but I want one promise in return." "What's that?" Rodriguez asked. "When this is over, when the silence is defeated, remember that it was the Alliance that came to you for help. Remember that we swallowed our pride and asked the people we feared to save us all." Rodriguez extended her hand again. "Ambassador, we never forgot that the Alliance was our home once. We're not doing this for revenge or glory. We're doing it because someone has to, and we're the only ones who can." As Morvain shook her hand, he wondered if he had just saved the galaxy or doomed it to a different kind of darkness. But with the silence spreading like a plague across the stars, consuming consciousness itself, he realized they were past the luxury of choosing their saviors. Sometimes the only thing that could fight a monster was another monster. The humans were about to remind the galaxy why they had been feared in the first place. When Deathworlders hunt. Admiral Sarah Cross stood on the bridge of the HSS Prometheus, watching her fleet emerge from hyperspace in a formation that would have given Alliance tacticians nightmares. Instead of the orderly battle lines favored by civilized militaries, the human ships scattered immediately, diving into asteroid fields and hiding behind planetary shadows like predators stalking prey. The recovered data from Dr. Kelmont's research station floated before her in holographic detail. The young xenobiologist had died trying to understand the silence, but her final recordings had provided crucial insights. The entity didn't just consume consciousness, it fed on organized thought patterns, growing stronger with each disciplined mind it absorbed. "Admiral," called Commander Torres from the tactical station, "long-range sensors are picking up the silence. It's bigger than we expected." The main display updated to show the entity in all its terrible glory. What had started as something the size of a small moon had grown into a writhing mass of darkness nearly as large as a planet. Streams of consumed consciousness flowed through its structure like veins, and space itself seemed to bend and twist around its presence. "How many systems has it absorbed since Kelmont's transmission?" Cross asked. 7 confirmed, Torres replied, "including the Centauri Home Defense Fleet, 300 ships gone without a trace." Cross nodded grimly. The Alliance's finest warriors, with their disciplined minds and predictable tactics, had been nothing more than food for this thing. But humans were different. They were chaos given form, unpredictability made flesh, and they had spent 50 years in exile learning how to weaponize their own insanity. "Dr. Kelmont," she said, turning to the figure standing beside her command chair. The woman who looked up wasn't the Dr. Zara Kelmont who had died at Research Station Omega-7. This was her sister, Dr. Maya Kelmont, a specialist in consciousness studies who had been working with human forces for the past 2 years. She had volunteered for this mission the moment they learned of her sister's fate. "The cognitive resonance patterns look exactly like Zara described," Maya said, studying the sensor readings. "The entity processes thoughts sequentially, like a computer. It can handle millions of organized minds simultaneously, but chaotic or paradoxical thinking creates processing errors. Which is where we come in," Cross said with a predator's smile. The human fleet was unlike anything that had ever existed in galactic history. During their exile, cut off from Alliance resources and facing threats from unknown regions of space, they had been forced to innovate in ways that would have been considered impossible or insane by conventional standards. The ships themselves defied easy categorization. The Prometheus appeared to be a standard dreadnought until you noticed that parts of its hull existed in slightly different dimensional phases, making it impossible to target accurately. The destroyer Satan's Gambit could fold space around itself, appearing to be in multiple locations simultaneously, and the entire fleet was linked by quantum consciousness networks that allowed them to think and react as a single chaotic organism. "All ships report ready, Admiral," Torres announced. Cross activated the fleet communication system. "This is Admiral Cross to all vessels. Remember, we're not here to fight fair. We're here to win. The silence has consumed 40 billion lives and it's still growing. Today we teach it what happens when it tries to feed on Deathworlders." The first phase of the attack began with something that looked like complete madness. Instead of coordinating their approach, the human ships began flying in seemingly random patterns, their movements so chaotic that the silence's absorbed tactical knowledge couldn't predict their actions. "Initiating Cognitive Warfare Protocol 7, announced Lieutenant Kim from her station. "All ships are now broadcasting pure chaos." The protocol was something only humans could have conceived. Each ship began transmitting the raw, unfiltered thoughts of their crews. Not organized communications or tactical data, but pure human consciousness in all its contradictory, emotional, irrational glory. Love and hate existing simultaneously, mathematical equations mixed with childhood memories, scientific analysis interrupted by random song lyrics and grocery lists. The effect on the silence was immediate and disturbing. The entity's smooth movement became erratic, its form writhing as if in pain. For the first time since it had begun its galactic consumption, it encountered minds it couldn't process properly. "Direct hit on the entity's consciousness matrix," Maya reported, monitoring the exotic sensors that could track thoughts themselves. "It's trying to understand human cognitive patterns, but we're creating too much interference." The second phase was pure human aggression unleashed. The fleet's weapons weren't the clean energy beams favored by the Alliance. These were weapons that attacked reality itself, quantum scramblers that made the laws of physics optional, dimensional torpedoes that struck targets from multiple universes simultaneously, and most terrifying of all, consciousness bombs that could weaponize thought itself. "Fire all batteries," Cross ordered. Space erupted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The human weapons didn't just damage the silence. They confused it, bombarding it with paradoxes and impossibilities that its consumed minds couldn't resolve. Energy that was simultaneously matter and antimatter struck targets that existed and didn't exist at the same time. The silence retaliated, lashing out with tendrils of pure emptiness that should have consumed the attacking fleet's consciousness in seconds. But the humans had prepared for this too. "Cognitive shields at maximum," reported the defense officer, "maintaining paradox barriers." The cognitive shields were perhaps humanity's greatest achievement during their exile. Instead of trying to protect their minds from invasion, they had learned to weaponize their own mental chaos. When the silence tried to consume human consciousness, it encountered thoughts so contradictory and paradoxical that its processing systems couldn't handle them. Human minds thinking about square circles, married bachelors, and the sound of one hand clapping. Memories that couldn't have happened mixed with plans for impossible futures. Love for enemies and hatred for friends, all existing simultaneously in the beautiful, chaotic mess of human consciousness. "The entity is destabilizing," Maya announced excitedly. "Its consciousness matrix can't maintain coherence while trying to process human thought patterns." But the silence was learning, adapting as it always did. Parts of its structure began to isolate themselves from the human chaos, creating pockets of absorbed order that could function normally. "It's adapting faster than we anticipated," Torres reported. "Sections of the entity are becoming immune to our cognitive warfare." Cross smiled coldly. "Then we move to Phase 3. All ships, prepare for synchronized insanity." What happened next would have driven Alliance observers mad if they had been present to witness it. The entire human fleet began to think as one, but not in any organized fashion. Instead, they created a network of pure chaos, each ship's consciousness linked to the others in patterns that defied logic. They thought in spirals and paradoxes, creating recursive loops of impossibility that fed back on themselves. They remembered things that hadn't happened yet and planned for events that had already occurred. They loved their enemies while fighting them and mourned for victories not yet won. The effect on the silence was catastrophic. The entity's consciousness matrix, built from billions of ordered minds, simply couldn't process the synchronized chaos of human thought. Like a computer trying to divide by zero, it began to collapse in on itself. "Direct neural link established with the entity," Maya reported, her voice strained. "I can feel its confusion, its pain. It's trying to understand us, but human consciousness is like a virus in its system." "Can you communicate with it?" Cross asked. Maya nodded slowly, her face pale with effort. It's afraid. It doesn't understand why we're different, why it can't consume us like all the others. Through Maya, Cross spoke directly to the silence, her words carried by thought itself into the entity's core consciousness. We are human, she said simply. We are chaos and order, creation and destruction, love and hate all existing at the same time. We are contradictions that refuse to be resolved, paradoxes that insist on being true. You cannot consume us because we are already impossible. The silence responded with something like desperation, trying one final assault on the human fleet. But instead of the focused attack it had used against the Alliance forces, its strike was chaotic, unfocused, confused by its attempt to understand human thought patterns. All ships, final phase, Cross commanded. Show it what Deathworlders do when they're truly angry. The human fleet's final attack wasn't a weapon in any conventional sense. It was pure human will made manifest, the combined consciousness of warriors who had spent 50 years learning to survive in the dark spaces between stars. They projected every memory of loss, every moment of defiance against impossible odds, every time they had refused to give up even when defeat was certain. They showed the silence the human capacity for stubborn, irrational, beautiful persistence. The refusal to be consumed, to be organized, to be anything other than magnificently, dangerously human. The entity's consciousness matrix couldn't survive the assault. Like a mind trying to hold two contradictory thoughts simultaneously, it began to tear itself apart. The dark mass that had consumed 40 billion lives started to collapse, its stolen consciousness flowing back into the void as its ability to maintain coherence failed. It's working, Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face. I can feel them. The consumed minds. They're being released. The silence gave one final shriek across dimensions before collapsing into itself and disappearing. The darkness that had threatened to consume all thought in the galaxy was gone, defeated not by superior firepower or advanced technology, but by the simple impossibility of human nature. All ships report status, Cross ordered. One by one her captains reported in. The fleet had taken damage, but they had survived. More importantly, they had won. Admiral, Torres said quietly, we're receiving communications from the liberated systems. The Alliance fleets they're back. Alive. Cross nodded, feeling the weight of galactic civilization settling back onto her shoulders. The silence was defeated, but the real work was just beginning. The galaxy would have to come to terms with the fact that its salvation had come from the very people it had exiled for being too dangerous. Dr. Kelmont, she said, turning to Maya, can you confirm that the entity is completely destroyed? Maya nodded slowly. Its consciousness matrix has collapsed completely. The individual minds it consumed have been released, though they'll need time to recover from the trauma. But Admiral, there's something else. What? In its final moments, the silence tried to understand us one last time. And in doing so, it left behind something. A gift, I think. Knowledge of other threats in the dark spaces beyond our galaxy. Things that even we might find challenging. Cross smiled grimly. Then I suppose the galaxy will be needing us again. As the human fleet began the journey back to Alliance space, carrying word of their victory, Cross reflected on the irony of their situation. They had been exiled for being too dangerous, too chaotic, too willing to break rules that civilized species held sacred. Now they were returning as saviors, having proven that sometimes the only thing that could fight an absolute evil was absolute chaos. The galaxy would have to decide whether it was ready to accept humanity back into the fold, knowing full well what they were capable of when unleashed. But as Cross watched the stars ahead, she wasn't worried about acceptance. Humanity had spent 50 years learning to survive on their own, growing stronger and stranger in the dark spaces where civilized species feared to go. The Deathworlders were coming home, and the galaxy would never be the same.